In the valley below the glass cliffs, the village of Arvin sat like a warm ember in winter. Lanterns hung from low eaves, and smoke curled from many chimneys. People moved about with careful steps. They had learned to be careful since the first ships came. The ships were not all bad. Some brought trade and stories. Some brought secrets that did not sleep. Rain fell soft on a night when Leora walked home from the market. She kept her small satchel close and hummed a tune her mother used to sing. Leora was small for her age, but her eyes held slow fires. She fixed things that others could not. A cracked wheel, a torn sail, a tiny clock that had forgotten how to keep time. People in Arvin called her Gentle Hands. She liked being called that. On the road she found a shape curled by the stone wall. It seemed part shadow and part bone. She slowed and crouched. The shape made a sound like a chain being undone. She reached out because she could not walk by and leave anything hurt. When her palm met the creature it shivered then sighed. Color moved like a tide under its scales. Leora had touched many things, but never something that remembered so many suns. The creature was not large. It could fit in a fisher basket if it wished, but its eyes were old. They looked at Leora with the weight of long nights. It blinked slow and let a small puff of warm air fog her fingers. Leora felt no fear. She placed her satchel down and took a scrap of cured meat from it. She offered the morsel. The creature sniffed and ate, and then it curled its head against her knee. The next morning the village woke to news. A ship had drifted into the harbor without signal flags. Governors and traders gathered and whispered. Word moved like bees. Leora kept her secret creature wrapped in a wool shawl under her bed. She did not tell her parents. She wanted to watch it breathe. She wanted to name it. At dusk she called it Ember. The name fit because Ember turned from dull gray to warm bronze when she stroked its back. People noticed changes in the valley. Fruit trees that had given weak harvests began to bloom again. Old nets mended themselves with new thread in a single night. Strangers stopped coughing. Leora thought at first these were small gifts that the creature gave without knowing. Then the Archon arrived from the glass cliffs. Archon Marin stepped from the gate with a face like flat stone. Marin carried a recorder and questions. He said the village was under watch. Strange energies had been seen near the cliffs and the council wanted answers. Leora kept Ember hidden, but she could not hide the way Ember looked at the sky. Sometimes Ember lifted its head and hummed a note that felt like a wind from beyond the cliffs. One night Marin walked close and heard the sound. His eyes narrowed. He asked Leora if she had seen any relics by the river. Leora lied and said no, she felt the lie like a pebble in her mouth. Ember nudged her foot as if to say we must move. The next day 2 strangers arrived. They wore robes that changed color with movement, and their skin had faint silver lines like river paths. They were not from the valley. They called themselves archivists and said they came from a place among the cliffs that kept memory like stone keeps water. The archivists asked many questions about the old legends. Leora watched them from a distance with Ember under her shawl. The archivists spoke about guardians that held knowledge in their bodies. They spoke softly, and their words had another weight, like coins dropped into a deep well. When the archivists left, an alarm sounded in the glass cliffs. Lanterns in the harbor flashed and a low bell tolled. People gathered at the docks. A ship returned with a wounded alien on its deck. The alien had crystalline marks and a voice like metal. It told of a library ship that had gone silent while carrying living archives across the sea of stars. The living archives were creatures like Ember, but vast and old. They were not meant to die. Someone had poisoned their memories with a sickness that erased names, songs, and seeds. People in the valley looked at each other and then to Leora. A heavy hush filled the square. Leora understood then the small creature in her room was part of a story older than the valley. Ember lifted its head and nuzzled her hand. Leora felt that same warm current in her palm. This time the current spoke a tiny thing inside her like a bell struck. It asked her to go. It asked her to learn. The village council met under cold lantern light. Archon Marin said whoever held Ember must bring it to the glass cliffs for study. The archivists insisted the creature be moved to the archives. Traders argued about salvage rights. Leora listened and felt Ember tremble like a reed. She stepped forward and did something no one expected. She told the council she would go with Ember to the cliffs. Silence held. Then the archivists looked at each other and offered a pale hand of acceptance. Before dawn Leora packed a small bag. She wrapped Ember in soft cloth and told the creature she would keep it close. Ember blinked and made the small wind sound again. Leora left in the hush while fog still clung to the fields. She did not know what doors she would open or which doors would open her. She only knew that Ember had chosen her the way a tide chooses a shore. Somewhere beyond the glass cliffs, among records older than stars, a secret waited. The valley watched until the dust swallowed the travelers and the lantern lights dipped back into ordinary time. The road to the glass cliffs rose like a ribbon pulled tight across the valley. Leora walked at a steady pace with Ember tucked inside her shawl. The small dragon peered out from time to time, watching trees bend and fields widen. Its breath warmed Leora's wrist. She felt calmer each time Ember hummed, as if the creature wrapped her in a safer world. By midday she reached the stone bridge that marked the last boundary of the valley. 2 guards waited there in bronze armor. They eyed her bag and her careful steps. One guard, a tall woman with narrow eyes, asked if she had heard the alarm signals from the cliffs. Leora nodded and said she had come to meet the archivists. The guard glanced at Ember, whose small head peeked from the cloth. Something passed across the guard's face. Fear, curiosity, or perhaps a memory. At the far end of the bridge, the archivists waited. Their robes glimmered like fish scales in sunlight. The one on the left introduced himself as Sullen. The other, taller and quieter, said she was Nira. Their movements were graceful and deliberate. They treated Leora not as a child, but as someone carrying a torch. Sullen offered to take her bag, but Leora held it tighter. Ember pressed against her chest. Sullen made no comment. The archivists understood that trust was a slow river. The climb toward the glass cliffs continued in silence. High walls of crystal rose on each side of the path. Small streams ran through cracks, glowing faintly. The cliffs hummed in a way that felt alive. Nira explained that memories were carved into the stone, layered through centuries. Creatures like Ember were linked to the cliffs through forgotten bonds. They were living pieces of the same history. Leora listened while keeping her hand on Ember. As Nira spoke, Ember's scales flickered with soft blue light. Sullen stopped walking and watched this reaction. His silver-lined face softened. He said Ember was responding to something hidden beneath the cliffs. A vault perhaps, or an echo of its own past. Leora asked if Ember knew what waited. Sullen shook his head. He said guardians felt history before they understood it. When they reached the entrance hall, workers and scholars hurried across wide floors. The room smelled like ink, copper tools, and mountain air. Crystals hung from the ceiling, catching sunlight and bending it into bright patterns on the walls. A group of council researchers surrounded an injured alien who lay on a stretcher. The alien had pale skin and sharp ridges along its jaw. Its eyes were clouded with pain. Leora recognized it as one of the travelers from the drifting ship. The alien turned its head toward her. Its gaze fell on Ember. Something like recognition flashed. It reached out with a shaking hand. Nira stopped Leora from stepping closer and said the alien was carrying memories from a lost archive ship. The archives the alien came from were destroyed at Sea of Stars. Their guardians had been infected with the same sickness Ember carried when Leora first found it. A gentle tone filled the hall as Council Elder Renath approached. Renatha's appearance was unlike the archivist's. He had metallic rings along his arms that shifted with every step. His eyes were deep green and unreadable. He welcomed Leora and said she was brave for coming. He asked Leora if she had felt any weakness since bonding with Ember. She said no, and Renath smiled lightly. He said that was a sign of true resonance. Renath guided them into the deeper wing of the cliffs. Long passages stretched ahead. Crystal walls glowed with faint light. Some places flickered like old memories trying to stay awake. At the end of the hall stood a chamber with a round door. On its surface were carvings of dragons in flight. Leora felt Ember grow still against her. The small dragon lifted its head and touched the door with its snout. The carvings pulsed as if alive. The chamber opened slowly. Inside it was circular and silent. In the center stood a platform with a bowl of carved stone. Nira explained this was the memory basin, a place where guardians once shared fragments of their knowledge. Leora stepped closer with Ember. Sulan warned her that the basin looked gentle but held sharp truths. The basin shimmered with liquid that was not water but something woven from light. Ember leaned forward. A beam of pale gold rose from its chest and met the basin. Images formed above the bowl. They showed planets surrounded by guardian flocks. Great halls filled with humans who looked different from Leora. Their faces were calm and wise. The images turned darker as towers of knowledge fell to shadows. A sickness spread like smoke. Guardians collapsed in rows. The scene shifted again. A group of alien figures gathered around a device that radiated a harsh glow. The device fed the sickness into guardian blood. Then the guardians were stolen one by one and carried toward a region of the galaxy marked with strange symbols. Renath stepped forward with a grave tone. He said this basin recording matched old warnings. Factions beyond the Sea of Stars feared the guardians and the humans who once worked as their equal partners. They built a plague to erase both memory and lineage. Leora felt her heart ache as Ember trembled. Sulan said the memory implied survivors had hidden on distant worlds. Humans and guardians once stood together, united by shared purpose. Now Leora was the first human in generations to awaken the resonance again. Nira pointed out that the enemy who created the plague would not want the bond restored. Leora asked what they expected her to do. Renath said the answer lay in the next chamber. They walked through a narrow passage that opened to a room carved entirely from crystal. In the center stood a sphere with swirling colors. Renath said it was a star map of lost archives. There were 18 marked locations. 17 archives still lived but weakened. One was dark and silent. Ember pressed its paw against the sphere. The map shifted and one of the marked points glowed brighter. Renath said that was the closest guardian who needed help. He also said the enemy might already be on the way to claim it first. Nira told Leora she would not be going alone. She introduced a young pilot named Taver who had skin like sand and a steady posture. Taver bowed and said he would protect Leora and Ember. The weight of the journey settled on Leora. She looked at Ember who gazed back with trust. She felt the same warm current in her palm. She said she would go because Ember had chosen her and because the guardians were worth saving. The archivists nodded. Renath touched the star map and said they had little time. Taver prepared their ship at the highest platform. Leora stepped out into the cold mountain air and looked at the horizon where stars waited. Ember chirped softly and climbed to her shoulder. Together they walked toward their new path. The ship that Taver prepared waited on the highest platform like a sleeping bird. Its wings were folded tight, and soft blue coils pulsed along its frame. Leora stood at the edge with Ember perched on her shoulder. The wind carried the smell of cold stone and ancient secrets. She felt the weight of everything she had learned in the chambers below. She was a girl from a quiet valley, yet now she stood on a mountain where living archives whispered through crystal walls. Taver walked around the ship checking lines and energy nodes. He moved with practiced certainty. He had flown explorers, traders, and rescue missions, but this was different. He could feel it each time he looked at Leora and the small dragon watching him with bright eyes. He asked Leora if she was afraid. She said she was, but she also felt something warm in her chest. She said she felt like she had stepped into a story that had been waiting for her for many years. The archivists Sulan and Nira brought a small case filled with charts, maps, and a metal cube that hummed gently. They said the cube contained information about the last Guardian signal. Tavor placed the cube inside the ship's memory bank. Once it settled, the ship reacted with a low hum that vibrated through the floor. Sulan bowed to Ember, and Ember returned a tiny dip of its head. Nira told Leora that the bond she shared with Ember would grow stronger with each journey. She told Leora to trust the warmth she felt in her hands. Leora nodded and promised she would. The ship lifted with a slow rise. Leora watched the glass cliffs shrink below her. She held Ember close as the sky opened wide. Clouds peeled away. Stars brightened. Tavor guided them toward a cluster of distant lights that shimmered like silver dust. The star map projected a path showing their destination. It was a place called the Hollow Reef. It lay between two quiet stars and a curtain of drifting ice. According to the archivists, the Guardian stranded there had not moved for weeks. Its strength was failing. As they approached the Hollow Reef, the ship slowed. The region felt strange. The stars looked stretched, as if light itself hesitated. Tavor frowned as he studied the readings. He said something was wrong. The map signals twisted, bending like reeds in a fast river. Ember lifted its head and hissed. Its scales flickered from bronze to pale gold. Leora felt her pulse quicken. She whispered to Ember that they would be careful. The Hollow Reef revealed itself as a ring of floating stone islands. They moved slowly, carried by a current that did not belong to any sea. Pale trees grew from the stone and bent inward as if listening. At the center of the reef, they saw it. A massive guardian lay curled near a cracked basin of crystal. Its scales were once a deep cobalt but now had dimmed to gray. Its wings wrapped around its body like a shield. The guardian did not lift its head when the ship landed. Leora stepped onto the stone. The air felt heavy. Every breath tasted like dust. She walked toward the guardian with Ember at her heels. Tavor followed with a cautious step. Leora reached out, but the guardian did not respond. It was breathing, but the breaths were shallow. She placed her hand gently on the creature's snout. Ember touched the guardian's wing with its own small paw. A slow wave of gold light spread from Ember through Leora's fingers. For a moment nothing changed. Then the guardian's eyes opened slightly. They were cloudy but aware. A voice entered Leora's mind. It was soft and tired. It said she carried the old light. It said Ember still remembered the first songs. The guardian told her that darkness had been following the living archives for many seasons. The sickness was not only a plague but a door. A door that allowed enemies to drain the memories hidden inside the guardians. Before Leora could ask more, the stone beneath her shook. Tavor shouted. Thin shadows rose out of the cracks like smoke turning solid. Their shapes twisted and flowed with sharp edges and bright core lights. They were the ones who had hunted the Guardians. The Guardians had called them the Hollow Ones. They fed on the memories stored in living archives. They were drawn to fear and weakening creatures. Tavor fired a signal flare to distract the shadows. Ember jumped in front of Leora and let out a sound deeper than anything its small body should hold. The sound shook the air. It pushed the shadows back for a moment. The guardian lifted its head, struggling. It told Leora that she must share her energy with both Ember and the dying guardian. She hesitated, unsure if she could survive that. The guardian told her she would not lose herself. She would remember everything she needed. Leora placed her palm on the Guardian's chest. Warmth raced up her arm like sunlight drawing a trail inside her. Ember pressed its forehead against Leora's hand. The gold light spread again. This time it was brighter. The Guardian's scales regained color. Its wings rose from the stone. The light shot outward and the shadows screamed with sharp voices. Some fled into cracks. Others dissolved in the bright glow. Tavor shielded his eyes from the light. The stone islands trembled but did not break. The Guardian rose to its full height. Its wings cast a strong shadow that covered Leora. It thanked her in a voice that carried peace. It said she had awakened something lost in its memory. It said the old bond between humans and Guardians was alive again. Ember chirped loudly, proud of its work. The Guardian lowered its head so that its forehead touched Leora's shoulder. She felt strength pass into her, but also clarity. She saw for a moment a vision of humans standing with Guardians in a vast hall of stars. She saw hope she did not understand but wished to follow. The Guardian turned its gaze toward the horizon. It said this was only the beginning. The sickness had many roots and the enemies who created it would not stop. They would send more hunters. They would try to break the bond again. The Guardian said Leora must return to the glass cliffs. The council had to hear what she had seen. The archivists must be ready to restore the bond across the galaxy. Leora looked at Tavor. He nodded and said they would travel wherever needed. Ember climbed onto Leora's arm and nuzzled her neck. The Guardian unfolded its wings and lifted into the sky. Its call echoed across the hollow reef. It promised to find the other Guardians and warn them that a healer had awakened. As the ship lifted from the stone islands, Leora watched the Guardian soar above them like a blue flame rising to the stars. She felt fear but also courage. She understood now that she was part of a story older than any village or archive. Ember curled into her lap as the ship left the reef behind. Tavor guided the ship into open sky. The journey ahead was long, but Leora was no longer the quiet girl from the valley. She was someone the Guardians trusted. She was someone who could change what the galaxy remembered. If you want a full 7-part version, or SEO titles, thumbnails, descriptions, or Leonardo AI image prompts, just tell me.